Britain built the greatest industrial wonders the modern world had ever seen. Shipyards that launched empires, steelworks that fed a continent, car plants that put the world on wheels, chemical complexes so vast they ran their own internal railway networks, power stations that kept a capital city lit for half a century, places like Singer in Clyde or the shipyard in Belfast that built the Titanic. At their height, these places gave work to hundreds of thousands of people, shaped entire regions, and carried a nation's identity in their brickwork and their smoke. Then, one by one, Britain tore them down, sold them off, or simply walked away. Some were demolished overnight. Some decayed slowly behind chain-link fences. Some were erased so completely that the ground they once occupied holds no memory at all. Here are 10 of them. Start on the Clyde, where the Singer sewing machine factory at Kilbowie once held a title that seemed almost impossible to believe. At its peak in 1913, this single site turned out more than 1.3 million machines in a year, with over 16,000 workers on the payroll, producing, by Singer's own account, 80% of the world's sewing machines from one address in Clydebank. The factory covered nearly 1 million square feet, the largest sewing machine works on Earth. Through the 1960s, Singer redirected investment toward cheaper plants in Asia and Europe, and the Kilbowie workforce dropped from 16,000 to just over 6,000 in a single decade. Financial losses and collapsing orders finished it in June 1980. More than 90 years of production brought to a close in one announcement. The buildings came down in the late 1990s. One thing survives. Singer Railway Station, constructed to carry the workers in, still operates today. Move south to Bilston in the West Midlands, where steel had been produced on the same ground since around 1780. The Springvale works grew, across 2 centuries, into one of the largest steel plate operations in the region, an anchor of black country industry through generations of workers and wars. British Steel Corporation's rationalisation strategy after nationalisation favoured large coastal plants that could import ore and export product by sea. Inland works like Bilston could not compete on those terms. The main plant closed in May 1979, with nearly 2,000 jobs gone. The final sections shut in July 1981, ending 200 years of hot metal production in a single administrative decision. A grassroots campaign led by local workers and their trade unions had resisted the closure for a decade. Industrial action included, though ultimately to no effect. Gone by 1981. The site is housing now. A training centre is the last building left standing. Then there is Consett in County Durham, where ironstone was first smelted in 1840, and where, by 1889, the works had expanded into the largest steel plate factory in the world. 6,000 people drew wages there at the plant's height, making it the economic spine of an entire upland town in northeast England. The same logic that ended Bilston ended Consett. British Steel Corporation's preference for coastal production over inland works, a preference that Margaret Thatcher's government showed no inclination to reverse. The furnaces stopped on 12 September 1980, with over 4,000 jobs lost in a single day, leaving a 35% unemployment rate in a community that had almost nothing else to fall back on. The steelworks was levelled. Almost nothing physical remains. 2 steel sculptures, cast from materials salvaged off the site, stand as the only acknowledgement of 140 years of industry. From the northeast, the story travels to London, where the Royal Arsenal at Woolwich functioned from 1671 until 1994. At its wartime peak, the arsenal stretched across 1,300 acres and drew on a workforce of around 80,000 people, making it the largest armaments complex in the world. It supplied ordnance for every major British conflict from the Napoleonic Wars onward. Shifts in military technology and the changing nature of warfare gradually reduced its purpose. Manufacturing closed in 1967, and the Ministry of Defence finally departed in 1994. The site is now a residential development called Royal Arsenal Riverside. The Royal Brass Foundry endures, preserved and repurposed for archive and exhibition use. Everything else is apartments. The Linwood car plant in Renfrewshire opened in May 1963, the direct result of a government policy that withheld industrial grants from companies unwilling to build in designated development areas. Scotland would have its car factory. 5,000 workers assembled the Hillman Imp on a site capable of producing 40 vehicles an hour. The factory had been placed, according to the prevailing account, where economic logic alone would never have put it. By 1975, annual output had fallen to just 19,000 cars on a line designed for 10 times that number. When Peugeot Talbot acquired Chrysler UK and weighed its options, Linwood lost to Ryton. It closed in 1981. The site is a retail and business park now. The Proclaimers named it in a song, and that is the monument it received. Battersea Power Station on the Thames stood, at its completion in 1939, as the largest brick building in Europe, its 4 white chimneys fixed into the London skyline like monuments. It powered the capital through the Blitz and into the post-war decades, without interruption. Battersea closed in March 1975 as operating costs climbed and output declined with age. Battersea B followed in October 1983. A failed conversion attempt in the late 1980s stripped the roof and left the shell open to the weather for years. Empty for nearly 4 decades. Reopened as a mixed development of shops, offices and apartments in 2022, admitting the public for the first time since the turbines fell silent. Wedgwood at Barlaston in Staffordshire carries one of the oldest names in British manufacturing, established in 1759 by Josiah Wedgwood, exporting pottery across Europe and the Americas within a generation of its founding. For more than 2 centuries, it defined British ceramics. A 1987 merger with Waterford Crystal assembled a luxury goods group that accumulated serious debt. The combined business entered administration in January 2009. A New York private equity firm purchased it that year. Production at Barlaston continues, though the workforce has contracted sharply and proposals for further reductions were reported as recently as 2025. Still working, still producing, still carrying the old name, but on terms Josiah Wedgwood would not have recognised. The ICI chemical complex at Wilton on Teesside opened in 1949 and expanded into the largest chemical site the British industry had constructed to that point. At its height, in the late 1960s, 25,000 people worked there, producing nylon, polyester, and the petrochemicals that kept British manufacturing supplied. I recorded over £1 billion in annual profit through much of the 1980s, then spent the following decade selling divisions and carrying debt. One explanation holds that rising UK energy costs, in part a consequence of how North Sea oil revenues were managed and domestic energy markets were structured, made British chemical production progressively unable to compete against European rivals operating inside the EEC, as well as lower-cost producers further afield. AkzoNobel absorbed the company in 2008. The last major plant on the Wilton site, the ethylene cracker, closed in 2025. The name ICI is gone. At Longbridge in Birmingham, Herbert Austin completed his first car in 1905 and built a factory that would, at full stretch, produce over 300,000 vehicles a year and employ 27,000 people on a single site. The Austin 7, the Mini, the Rover 75 all came from here. The 1968 merger that formed British Leyland shaped by government encouragement, combined competing plants and competing cultures into a company that one account describes as operating in nearly permanent financial difficulty, industrial action, and walkouts, a near constant feature of the 1970s, with the convener Derek Robinson, known as Red Robbo, becoming the symbol of an era. MG Rover entered administration on 8 of April 2005, ending mass car production at Longbridge and leaving 6,500 workers without employment before the morning was out. By April 2025, 46 people remained, maintaining a technical centre for a Chinese-owned brand assembling cars in Shanghai. And the last of them, the one whose outline still defines a city's sky, is Harland and Wolff in Belfast. Founded in 1861, it ranked, by the early 20th century, among the largest shipyards in the world. Its wartime workforce peaked at 35,000, building aircraft carriers, cruisers, and overhauling more than 22,000 vessels. It launched the Titanic. It launched the Olympic. It launched the Britannic. The growth of air travel eroded the ocean liner trade, Japanese competition undercut the merchant shipbuilding market, and the investment never came. By August 2019, when the company entered administration, the workforce had contracted to 79 people. The cranes, Samson and Goliath, still rise above the Lagan. A Spanish firm announced new investment in late 2024. Still standing, still named, still watched. Whether that signals a revival or a final chapter, the Clyde and the Tees and the Black Country already know how these stories tend to end. What these 10 places share is not misfortune. The prevailing account among historians of British deindustrialization identifies the same structural forces running through all of them. Chronic underinvestment relative to overseas competitors, the steady migration of production to lower-cost economies, climbing domestic energy prices, and a sequence of mergers and reorganizations that produced organizations too large and too fractured to adapt in time. The Thatcher era accelerated the timetable for many of these closures, and the question of what government policy did or failed to do in those years remains genuinely contested. What is not contested is what was lost. The pattern that played out here, entire communities built around a single industry, stripped of it in a single decade, is the same pattern that gave America the Rust Belt, and that has since repeated across every economy that built something with its hands and then found the economics no longer added up. Today, the same argument is being rehearsed over Port Talbot and Scunthorpe, the steel towns still standing that may not be standing in that form for much longer. One by one, the wonders went quiet. The cranes came down. The ground was cleared. And in the silence where the furnaces used to roar, Britain put up houses, retail parks, and apartment blocks, and called it regeneration.